love now and
Did you fall in love last night?
I love her.
Love was stronger than anything.
For the love.
Love.
And I love you more than anything.
There's still love. Love.
From the New York Times, I'm Anna Martin. This is Modern Love, and it's Father's Day this week. Like with many holidays, there's a greeting card version of Father's Day, right? You're grilling together. You're going fishing together. You're fixing a car. You're being taught how to tie a tie. But of course, there's the real version of having a dad. A lot of people grew up with dads who might have been tough to be around or tough to understand. Some people grew up with dads who just weren't around. That was the case for writer and filmmaker Julian Brave NoiseCat. He grew up with a dad like that. His father was this big deal native artist, this larger-than-life guy, but he also had a way of just kind of disappearing. And Julian didn't understand why his old man couldn't just show up and do the dad thing. Then Julian grew up. He became a writer and a filmmaker. His documentary Sugarcane got nominated for an Oscar. And through his work, he started looking for answers to all these questions he had about his dad, about their relationship, about the painful history that made his dad pull away. Julian just wrote about his father for the New York Times Magazine in a piece called How Getting Stoned with My Dad Helped Us Heal. And when I reached out to him about the story, it turned out Julian was about to become a dad himself, and he was kind of freaking out about it. So I knew this was the perfect time to talk to him. Julian Brave NoiseCat, welcome to Modern Love.
Thanks so much for having me, Anna.
Julian, you wrote an essay in the New York Times Magazine that I'm very excited to talk to you about. It's about nights you spent smoking weed with your dad and how healing that was. I want to start off just by asking, what is it like to smoke weed with your dad? This is something I cannot even imagine doing with my own father if he's listening.
My dad is a good hang. You could say a lot of things about my old man, but he is definitely a good hang. First of all, he's my pusher man. You know, I won't claim that I don't smoke weed without my dad. I mean, I discovered this morning on the way to this interview that I had a pack of pre-rolls in my pocket. So, you know, little pot calling the kettle black here, but he's a lot of fun. Like one of the things we like to do is we like to play games. He's big on
While high.
While stoned, yeah. So he invents games and, you know.
What are we talking about? Are these what are these games?
There's one in particular that has stuck around. It's called Bong Hit Scrabble. So you got your tiles in front of you. You know, you're trying to figure out words to spell with the tiles to make the most points. So you're doing math, you're doing spelling, you know, and then you're playing your tiles. And then when you're done, you gotta take the glass bong, pack a bowl, put your lips to the bong.
I'm loving the step by step.
And you get that nice gurgle, the bong gurgle sound.
Yes, you do. Not that I'd know.
The water going through there.
Listening. I mean, let me ask you this. It's like Bong Hit Scrabble again. Not a game I've played, at least in that iteration. Seems like it'd be very difficult as the night would wear on. Do you remember like the best word either you or your dad have gotten while playing Bong Hit Scrabble?
Well, here's the thing: is that the words become less dictionary word as you go. My dad once famously played Slopify.
Oh my God, I love that.
It's not actually a word, but it should be a word maybe, if Merriam-Webster is listening.
What about your best word? Do you remember your sort of crowning achievement?
See, this is the thing, is that my lore pales in comparison to my father's lore, which is, I think, a central problem of fathers and sons. We were always trying to catch up to our dad's legend.
Why were these nights with your dad so meaningful to you?
Well, you know, I think that to zoom out here, I didn't grow up with my dad. You know, he left when I was 6, 7. You know, the backstory to all this is that, you know, my dad grew up on Indian Reserve in British Columbia called Canham Lake, pretty small, decently remote. He was born at an Indian residential school a school designed to, in the words of one of their architects, get rid of the Indian problem. The idea was that native culture was backwards, was leading us to the devil, so to speak, was making us bad capitalists. And so they had to assimilate us into Christianity and into the broader dominant society. And, one of the impacts of not allowing a whole race of people to raise their own kids is, we eventually kind of unlearn how to do it. And so when my dad became a dad, he didn't really know how to be a father to me. I was his firstborn kid, and he struggled with alcoholism. So he, surprise, we're talking about substances. My dad had a history with substances. We kind of all did, and so he pieced out. And to rebuild that relationship, I moved back in with him when I was 28 years old. And major way in which we bonded would be at the end of the night, we would play games and get stoned, tell stories.
Let's talk a bit more about your dad and paint a sort of even more vivid picture of him beyond the scrabble of it all. If I saw your dad walking down the street, how would I know it was him? And let's say his full name too, because I'm realizing we're just calling him Dad.
His full name is Edwin Archie NoiseCat. He's going to be annoyed that I said Edwin, so I'll just say Ed Archie NoiseCat. Yeah, he's, this is kind of a contradiction in terms because there aren't really any famous Indian artists. I mean, I dare you to name one. But he was, to the extent that there was such a thing as a famous Indian artist. My dad was a famous Indian artist. When I was a kid, I remember he was pictured on the cover of Native People's magazine with a backwards Kangol hat and purple rock star shades. Like cool. He was, he was a little bit of an icon.
Was that like an everyday look for him, or was that just for the cover of the magazine?
My dad is still a bit of a style icon, to be completely real with you. One time, not that long ago, I remember we went out to get pancakes together, and there was a table of Gen Z dudes, kids decidedly younger than me.
Sure.
At this table, and my dad walked in. He was wearing a bucket hat, and literally these 20-year-olds, if they were even that old, were sick bucket hat, dude. And I'm just standing next to this old man, just he's not old, but my old man. Being come on.
This says a lot, not just about the look, but to me about the charisma, the pull.
He's got the riz, as they say. He's got the riz.
When you were growing up, when you were a kid, you said your dad left around 6 or 7. I want to know, in those years after he left and didn't live with you anymore, how much did you see your dad? Did he show up when he said he would? What were those interactions like, and how did you feel about them?
Yeah, my dad was kind of with the wind. He would not show up very often. There were some years where I maybe saw him once or twice. There were some years I didn't really see him at all. He gave up all custody to me. I remember on visitation days or when I'd get to see him, I would watch him go until I couldn't, until he was literally out of sight, right? I would keep my eyes on him as long as I possibly could. Because, I think underlying that was a question of when I would see him again. And then, also possible, but not one that I like to acknowledge very often, whether I would see him again. But at the same time, my mom would give him opportunities to kind of perform the role of a father, I guess would be the way to put it. There were some hockey tournaments and things. We're Canadian, so I'm a hockey player. And when I was a kid, there maybe would be a hockey tournament weekend where my dad would take me to the hockey tournament. So there was one weekend I remember when I was 12 years old, I was playing on a Pee-wee all-star team, but from the Bay Area. Let's not get too excited here. This is not, we're not talking about Toronto.
Okay, understood.
Yeah, I'm a pretty good hockey player, but I'm not nothing to write home about. And so, we were playing in Anaheim, and it was my dad's weekend to take me. And at the time, I remember distinctly, he was super into Mike Jones, the rapper from Houston. So you got to imagine little kid with his dad who's not really present, and Mike Jones is rapping, "Back then, hoes didn't want me, now," you know what I mean? just in case people don't remember Mike Jones.
Thank you.
And on top of that, he's speeding a lot. Oof. My dad is a road warrior. My dad has put probably more miles on cars than 99% of the population. He's driven all over North America. And he doesn't do this as much anymore, but he used to drive like a maniac. And he had all kinds of unpaid speeding tickets all across the continent to prove it. And so he was driving around way too fast, listening to Mike Jones. And I asked him, I was like, aren't you worried that like the cops are going to stop you or something? And he told me, and like, you know, straight face, like he fully like means what he says. He says, son, I have crazy horse medicine. The cops can't see me. They can't catch me. Which, like, by the way, Crazy Horse, in case people aren't totally familiar, he was a famous Oglala Lakota warrior and leader. He fought the United States. Also, pretty famously, after he turned himself in, he was stabbed in the back with a bayonet. So he actually was caught. Okay,
so that it did kind of fell down upon further examination. But the sentiment that your dad was saying was, how did you understand as a 12-year-old? I mean, it's really vivid. I can see this. You're like looking over at your dad. You're speeding down the highway. He's saying this to you. What was he communicating?
I think that he was communicating that he was a legendary, you know, mythic kind of trickster figure. You know, and to be honest with you, like, maybe he is. I don't know, you know, like he has defied death like more times than I could count, more times than he can remember, you know. Like he's gotten out of countless run-ins with the law. You know, like this is a man who maybe he does have crazy horse medicine. I mean, I will say, when he said that he had crazy horse medicine, I didn't fully not believe him. You know, like I know that my dad is full of shit, but at the same time, you know.
Something about it was resonant or rang true. These were the moments, it seems pretty few and far between, that you spent with your dad. And it seems like he would make deep impressions during those times and then leave again. How did you and your mom talk about your dad when he wasn't there?
Yeah, you know, my dad managed to be a main character in my life, despite, you know, not making most of the scenes. You know, I remember when I was 12, my mom was driving me back from hockey practice, and she said, I don't really remember exactly how the conversation led up to this, but she said, you know, you have to be prepared for the real possibility that your father might die. You know, I was 12 years old when my mother said that to me. And, you know, that was a real place where his road was potentially leading him. You know, my dad was alcoholic. He was drinking back in those days. And hopefully was, but, you know, a pretty significant self-destructive streak in him. And, you know, at various moments in his life, he has himself, like, really struggled with whether he wants to be here, you know? Right around that time was the time that he took on the cops in Red Lodge, Montana. Cops pulled him over, and, you know, he was like fed up with life and all that sort of stuff. And they like had to tase him twice to get him to go down, because, you know, he's a pretty hefty man. I mean, you know, what he tells me is that, like, the crazy horse metaphor for that one actually maybe makes more sense, because, you know, I think part of what he was chasing down there was some sort of, I don't know if suicide by cops is quite right, but like reckoning via cops, you know.
When your mom said that, prepare for the possibility that your dad might die, when you thought about a world in which your dad was no longer alive, what was that world like? Could you even contemplate that or imagine it, the emotions surrounding that potential?
Despite not having my dad around and carrying that wound with me, I never really believed that he was going to die, in part because I believed him when he said he had crazy horse medicine. I believed that he had some sort of magic in him, for lack of a better way of putting this, that helped him survive, that helped him, get through all these crazy situations that he found himself in, that he often put himself in.
Did you have any, it seems like there was an admiration for your dad, sort of his otherworldly qualities. Did you want to be like him in certain ways?
When I was little, I definitely wanted to be like him. The first thing is that my dad's a carver, and the thing about carving is that it is traditionally an art form that is passed father to son. And so when I was little, there was some expectation, maybe not my own, but of people around, that like my dad would put carving tools in my hand and I would learn how to be an artist like him. I had all these memories, especially of when I was little before he left, of like, being his little sidekick. Like, when I was a little guy, people would call me like a mini Ed. And he'd throw me in the van and we'd go to these, he'd turn on The Land Before Time on the VHS in the back seat. And, we'd drive around the country to art shows and stuff. Like it was it was kind of like a mythical little childhood experience. It's an interesting thing. Like on the one hand, like you aspire to be like your dad when you're little, and then I think a very natural thing that happens, whether or not your parent is present or not, is then you like kind of in your adolescence want to be nothing like your
swing the exact other way. Yeah.
And so my dad, by the time I was like 11, 12, 13, he was my model of who I did not want to
Tell me
be.
more about that. I'm interested in that switch.
Well, I think that on the one hand, like my dad, he was this incredible like native artist guy who clearly had a lot of talent. And then I think that the thing that I saw, I was just like, man, like you have all this talent, but like you keep getting in your own way because you have all this stuff that you haven't, dealt with. And the most obvious one was the drinking. So, I, from a young age, I understood my father was an alcoholic, and I really, really didn't want to become an alcoholic. Like I know that there's a lot of stereotypes around Native people and alcohol, and I don't want to play into those too much, but like it is also a very real thing that lots of my family, myself included, have struggled with. And it was definitely an Achilles heel for my father. He wasn't a present father. I mean, obviously, like the biggest thing was like I wanted to not be the same kind of dad that he was someday. Like, I think that's the biggest fear also, is like the thing about having a father figure like this is like maybe it's all of our fathers, but like, it is parts of you worry that someday you will just repeat all these mistakes that you see so plainly as mistakes, because like, this man is also half of my genetics.
We'll be right back. When you were a kid or then a teenager, did you ever think your dad would become a bigger or more present part of your life?
No. I kind of thought that, well, there was at 16, I remember distinctly, I called him up and I kind of told him off for all the stuff,
Wow. Okay. What was that like? Did you plan it in advance or did it just come rushing out?
No, I think it probably kind of came rushing out with the hormones and everything else. I saw by then pretty plainly the pain that it had caused me, and I, felt that he should know.
What did you say, if you don't mind sharing some of it? Do you remember?
I don't really remember. I remember crying pretty hard and, just telling him that like I was angry that he left, and why did he have to leave, and left me with the most painful thing that I'd ever dealt with. And like I don't actually remember a lot of these things, but my mom says that like after my dad left for the last time when I was a little kid, like, and said he was moving to Santa Fe, New Mexico, peacing out after they divorced and all that I like wailed and that I was inconsolable. I don't actually remember that, but probably for preservation reasons. But like these things, they really hurt. And I tried to convey to him that. But the thing about, this is the thing that's so tricky about my dad too, is like survival becomes its own kind of justification in a certain way.
Huh.
Like he's been through so much. He really lived like a life that was a lot harder than mine when I was a kid. Like I don't want to overstate my, middle class daddy problems. Like, my dad, like they didn't have running water on the Cannon Lake Indian Reserve when my dad was a kid, like there was really bad stuff happening all around. Like he dealt with things that I thankfully never had to deal with.
Let's talk about why you decided to move back in with your father, because it relates to all of this. How old were you when you decided? You hadn't lived with him since you were 6 or 7. And now at what age do you decide to move in with him?
So it was November of 2021 that I technically switched my residence. I was 28 years old. I had been living on the East Coast for the prior decade of my life, pretty much, for college and then for my career. And in 2021, there was a discovery of 215 potential unmarked graves at an Indian residential school in Canada in Kamloops. And it was like an international news event. I had set out to write a book and also to co-direct a documentary. The documentary was pretty squarely focused on the Indian residential schools. The book it touches on the residential schools, but it's more broadly about my dad and about Native identity, Natives across the continent. And I understood that both projects would have a lot to do with him. And so I decided, like, might as well get as close to your subject as you possibly can. So yeah, I moved in with him.
Were you nervous about that?
Yeah, I had no clue how it was going to go. Obviously the hope was that we would figure out stuff. We would both learn stuff about his story and our story. My dad didn't actually know really much about the story of his birth. There was kind of a rumor that he was born in Williams Lake and found in a dumpster. That was the version of the story that I had heard before. Him and I had never really talked about it. And that was, true for a lot of people. That was how our people survived, was by I think that's a very normal thing, not talking about the stuff that you've been through. And, my dad was similar. He didn't really know about the circumstances around his birth. He didn't want to look at it, didn't want to think about it, didn't want to talk about it. And then there was this discovery of all these potential unmarked graves at these schools. And, when you have some inkling that you were born and then found in a dumpster, you immediately identify with those dead kids. He was like, that could have been me. And, I think we all were like, holy crap. Like, that never really registers until something like that, or never really had registered. Like, oh my God, like my dad could have been one of those kids. And so I think it led to him wanting to understand, what happened, like what were these schools, and all these sorts of questions. And I think the hope was to answer some questions about his relationship to the schools, because he had this sort of question mark around his birth and his, first years and his childhood. And then to, how that had impacted me and his life. And, also to create the opportunity for us to have a real meaningful relationship, to heal those wounds a little bit.
I want to make sure that there's this incredibly powerful scene in your documentary that you were working on when you were living with your dad, where he reads a newspaper article for the first time, it seems, on camera, that tells more about his story. Can you share what else your father and you learned about that origin story through the process of making this work?
Yeah, my dad was born at St. Joseph's Mission. He's the son of my ke'a, my grandmother, and my pa'a, who was no longer with us. My ke'a hid the pregnancy because they weren't married, and there's a big thing at the time, especially in Catholicism, about unwed children.
She was at the residential school when she was pregnant, your grandmother.
She was actually working as a nurse, but
Gotcha.
she had gone to the residential school. And then so she went back to the residential school under circumstances that we still don't really fully understand, and then delivered the baby. And after the baby was delivered, it was found in the trash incinerator. I kind of doubt that she picked the baby up and walked it to the trash incinerator. So there's a big question of, how that all went down. The baby was described as Baby X in the Williams Lake Tribune. That was my father. And interestingly, even at the time, this was 1959, August 16, 1959 is the day of my dad's birth. Even in the conservative small town Williams Lake Tribune, at the time they were asking questions, damning questions about, what sorts of procedures and policies and practices at this institution might lead a young mother to put a baby in a trash incinerator. And as we were making sugarcane, we discovered that my father was not the only reported incident of this. So there was a pattern of infanticide at this school. And I think the part that's hardest about it is that it gets at not just the bad things that happened to us at these schools, which were numerous. Like there was rampant sexual abuse at St. Joseph's Mission. In fact, the first criminal cases for sexual abuse of clergy against children at schools came out of the St. Joseph's Mission in Williams Lake. It's, it was bad. What happened to us was really, really bad. And the part about it that sometimes is even harder to talk about is what that then did within our own community and family context. So kids who were taken away, who were abandoned when they were kids, turned around and they didn't really know how to be parents, right? Like, because they weren't raised by their own parents. And, unfortunately, kids who suffered violence at the hands of priests and staff, clergy, sometimes they turned around and became violent. Kids who were abused, turned around and abused. That's the cycle that our communities, our families found themselves caught in. And, the same was true for my dad. Like he was abandoned when he was a kid and found in the trash incinerator. He dealt with like sexual abuse and all kinds of different like awful stuff just all over the place. And, he didn't know how to be a dad when he came around to his time to be a dad. And so we were, trying to figure out that story and how to tell it, and then also how to hopefully, change the ending, right? Like stitch our families, our communities back together.
Thank you for sharing that. I mean, it's when you watch your documentary, you see, but I also want to ask, you're living with your father as you're discovering his story, the broader pattern, many victims, the sort of ripple effects of these schools, which, as you're pointing out, is not unintentional, right? What was it like to talk to your father as he was understanding himself even more? What were your conversations like?
I mean, we would get stoned.
Right, okay. I know. Yeah.
Yeah, so what we would do is he would be out in the garage that doubled as his carving studio during the day, making his art. I would be, hunched over my laptop, figuring out how to write a book and make a documentary during the day. And just as a total aside, like, yet another point of envy for me with my father is that his creative process is a lot cooler than mine.
I was going to say, you're two artists, but there's a very difference.
There's a big difference. and he always gets to be cooler for whatever reason. So when he's out there making his art, he's like leaned over a log, adzing away, to the bass line of Led Zeppelin, of course, taking rips from the bong every few minutes.
Totally.
Like when he's making his art, it's like it's a vibe out there. It's like a music
physical,
video.
yeah,
It's physical. Like you want to hang out. Like when he's making art, he's also a great hang, Whereas, a writer, you're just kind of like hunched over a laptop with terrible posture,
Totally.
and nobody can talk or hang out with you. Like, you have to be locked in. And, as an aside, while I was doing that, I came across, because, our culture was nearly killed off by these schools. So, we have more than a lot of other indigenous communities, but we also lost a lot. And one of the things that we lost was a lot of our oral history. And our people, we used to tell stories about our first ancestor, the trickster coyote, who was this sort of patriarch figure from the beginning of time, who made the world, was sent to the earth by creator to set things in order, but was a trickster, and so he messed a lot of stuff up. So while he filled the river with salmon, he also used those salmon to try to marry into every single village along the river that would have him. And then, after having all these kids, he abandoned them and all this sort of stuff. So suffice to say, I was reading about my first ancestor, this epic creator, destroyer, survivor, deadbeat dad, the coyote. And, then I was like looking out at the carving studio at my own, epic creator, destroyer, survivor, deadbeat dad. And I was looking back at the text and out of the carving studio, back at the text, and, it kind of hit me. I was like, oh my God, like my ancestors were talking about men like my father. My father is the trickster coyote, oh my creator. And so just as an aside, maybe maybe there's like just an element of this in us that has been there from the beginning of time, that our own people have been trying to point out and telling us to be careful with.
Can I also say, though, you're saying as an aside, but to me this feels like kind of an essential, I mean, you tell me, I don't know if it's a shift is the right way to put it, but that understanding of your father that clicked in that moment feels important, right? Like it feels like you'd gone from this understanding that you had when you weren't seeing him as much as this person who you really didn't want to be like. And I'm not saying you changed that when you were living with him, but it seems like something made sense in that moment for you.
What I would say that was really interesting about it to me is that it gave me a language and a narrative and a character to put into my father that helped me explain all these things and feelings and thoughts that I'd already had about him, right? Like I already understood him to be this epic creator, destroyer, trickster figure. And, I think it gets at a lot. And it definitely helped me understand my own father, which is, also a really beautiful thing because it also comes from my own culture, right? It was a way of me understanding my dad that also helped me reclaim something that was lost by these schools.
I mean, is there a way in which seeing your dad as this coyote figure was also kind of giving him some sort of out? Because it's like, oh, this is sort of how he is, right? This is like how he was born to operate.
Yeah, of course. But doesn't that also just sort of deepen the truth of the whole thing too?
Tell me.
I think that my dad is always finding a way out. Like he always is slipping out of the accountability and all that sort of stuff, which is also like a very coyote kind of maneuver, I think. Like, he sneaks his way out of the trap. He tricks his way out of the trap. And, I think one way in which I think my dad may have ultimately tricked me is, by having me turn him into this like legendary figure, this kind of native artist dad stock character that will now exist forever in film and in literature.
I mean, it's just so interesting. You're learning all of this. You're so immersed in this research. You're playing Scrabble.
Bonghead Scrabble,
night.
TM.
And you're talking about your sort of shifting understanding of your father. Did your dad ever apologize in this time of living together for not being there?
No, not while we were living together. Yeah, I think he not without reason, can find justification for his behavior, his abandonment, all that sort of stuff. I mean, again, once you've been through the things that he's been through, it's pretty easy to justify a lot of different things. It wasn't until after all of it that he ever apologized, actually. So it wasn't until the book came out and then I gave him an advanced reader copy and he lost the first copy I gave him, not to...
It actually feels, from what I know of him,
very true to form. And then I gave him another one, and then he read it, and then that was actually the very first time that he ever apologized to me.
Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, he just said that like he understood a lot more the pain that he had caused me, and that he was really sorry for that. And I think he also, expressed how proud he was of the book as a work of art. I think that there was also in all of this, the making art out of all of it is also an echo of my dad in a pretty significant way. I mean, I didn't end up a carver or a visual artist in the same way that he is, but I now make my own art, which is isn't that what all dads want? They want their sons to go be little versions of them out in the world in some way, shape, or form. And so, yeah, I think it was a combination of the two. I think he felt his story was honored. He felt he understood mine and my pain more. He apologized for the first time in his life. And, he was also proud of the art that I made.
We'll be right back. Julian, I happen to know that you are going to become a dad yourself very soon. Congratulations. I mean, this is big.
Yeah, thank you. It's big would be an understatement. It feels like, the roller coaster of life is about to just take off. And the crazy thing about all of it is, I spent the last 5 years of my life now, telling stories about my father, reconciling with him in my own life, living with him. And my dad was born in 1959. I was born in 1993. He was 33 when I was born. And it's 2026. I just turned 33. I am becoming a dad at the same age that my father became my dad. And I'm, on top of that, also having a son.
Oh.
So, maybe there is something to all the magic coyote story, all that sort of stuff. This is one of my things running through my work. They make us Indians out to be these hokey hocus pocus, crystals and sage and all this sort of stuff. And I don't know, man, we've been here for thousands of years. Maybe there's a little bit of truth in our stories. Maybe we're not full of it.
You're going to have a son. You're going to have a son the same age your father was when he had you. Did you always want to be a dad? Was this something that was a long-standing desire of yours or a dream?
I did, yeah. At the same time as I have always been really scared that this is all future tense now because obviously kid's not here, but I always wanted to become a dad so that I could have an opportunity to, get it right. I'm sure I'm going to make a lot of mistakes, but the hope obviously is with each generation we make a few fewer mistakes than the last generation, and over time, hopefully we bring our people back from the genocide, that's the mission, of course.
What kind of dad do you hope to be?
I want to be a good dad. I want to have the magical relationship that I remember having with my own dad when I was little, minus the minus the misadventures. I want to do all sorts of cultural stuff with my kid. I hope he is a dancer like me. I'm already telling my partner that we're going to have a little hockey player. I hope that he's an artist too. My father's an artist. I tell stories and make art in my own kind of way. My partner makes beadwork and sews and all that sort of stuff. There's a lot of creativity in both of our families, so I hope that he one thing that I always wish I had the opportunity to do was sit there with my dad and learn how to carve. And my dad is still carving, still making his art, and hopefully will be for, some other time. So I have this real hope, this real dream that someday I'll get to bring my son into the studio and sit him down next to his Ed and put a little carving knife in his hand. See if we'll have a little carver. Maybe it skips a generation, Can
I ask what you're scared for?
Yeah, I'm I'm really scared that I'll make the same mistakes as my dad. I'm scared that I will mess things up in my family life and won't be able to be present for him. That that these cycles, which I see repeating around me all over the place, that they might repeat with me in certain ways. I mean, I think that's a really big fear.
When you have that fear, how do you respond to it or counter it? What do you say back to it?
I usually take out a pre-roll.
Dude.
I usually, pack a bowl. I also try to look at the fullness of the story with my own father. I think that at a certain moment in time, my belief was that my story of my relationship to father would always be one of brokenness and pain to a certain degree. But now it's a story of love and repair. Like this man who was not present for me, who, and other hockey stories, he left me in a hotel room in Las Vegas, which was very illegal for a weekend.
It's not good.
And bounced to Indiana to go to an art show. That our story included stuff like that. And, that it also has now included us becoming best friends and, even making art together and living under the same roof and having a great time, making some little coyote trickster adventures of our own in a beautiful way. And, I'm sure I'm going to make mistakes. Like, hopefully nothing as egregious as my old man, but, I'm sure I'll make mistakes. But like, it's very possible to live a full life with a full relationship, even when there's some messiness in the mix.
What kind of grandparent do you think your dad's going to be?
Oh, so here's the thing. I think that he's going to be an amazing grandparent.
This is sort of my feelings.
I think that Pat
he's going to rock. Like, that's what it is. Yeah.
It's going to be so easy for him. He just needs to show up and be, Pat Ed showing up in a bucket hat to with this carving knives.
It's going to be so cool.
He's going to kill. He's going to, it's going to be his Pat era. He's going to nail it.
Julian Brave NoiseCat, thank you so much for this conversation, and congratulations again.
Oh, Kooks Anna, thank you so much. It's an honor to talk to you, and dad stuff. It's in the air.
Okay, so in the time since we talked to Julian, he has become a father. His son, Copper Alexander Martin NoiseCat, was born in April of this year, and he was 9 pounds. Julian calls him a little bear of a kid and says he even growls when he's hungry. Julian's dad was in the delivery room as Julian's partner, Joan, gave birth, and Julian says his dad was probably the most nervous of anyone there. As for the first few weeks of fatherhood, Julian tells me that the most surprising thing has been how much Copper pees and poops on him. And if that doesn't say Happy Father's Day, I don't know what does. The Modern Love team is Davis Land, Elisa Gutierrez, Lynn Levy, Reva Goldberg, and Sarah Curtis. This episode was produced by Davis Land. It was edited by Lynn Levy. Our mix engineer was Daniel Ramirez. Original music in this episode by Marian Lozano, Pat McCusker, and Dan Powell. Dan also composed our theme music. Special thanks to Rebecca Blandon and Elena Saavedra Buckley. The Modern Love column is edited by Daniel Jones, and Mia Lee is the editor of Modern Love Projects. If you'd like to submit an essay or a tiny love story to the New York Times, we've got the instructions in our show notes. I'm Anna Martin. Thanks for listening.